If Iran doesn't live up to their agreement, or if they're not behaving, I will do what I have to do.
Trump administration has embarked upon one of the most consequential diplomatic gambles of its tenure, unveiling a carefully calibrated 60-day roadmap toward a comprehensive agreement with Iran following a pivotal round of negotiations in neutral Switzerland. Yet President Trump has simultaneously brandished a stark ultimatum that underscores the precarious nature of this high-wire act.
I think Iran, I can say on a sort of a different scale, is in its own way working out very well. Maybe it's hard to say just as well, but maybe almost just as well.
Warning Tehran in unequivocal terms that any deviation from its commitments will trigger immediate and severe consequences, stating with characteristic bluntness, "I will do what I have to do," a phrase deliberately left ambiguous to maximize psychological pressure on Iranian decision-makers.
It is not that I trust or distrust anybody. My point is that I trust actions. And what the president has asked us to do is verify what they're doing, focus less on what they're saying,
while preserving maximum flexibility for American military or economic retaliation. This dual-track strategy, extending diplomatic overtures while maintaining credible threats of force, represents a hallmark of the administration's foreign policy doctrine, one that seeks to replicate the transactional bargaining style that has defined its approach to North Korea, trade negotiations with China, and pressure campaigns against Venezuela. Yet Iran presents a uniquely complex challenge, given its sophisticated nuclear infrastructure, expansive regional proxy network, and deep-seated historical animosity toward the United States that dates back to the 1979 Islamic Revolution and the subsequent decades of sanctions, covert operations, and ideological confrontation. The Swiss talks, mediated in part by Swiss diplomats who have long served as the United States protecting power in Tehran, produced what Vice President J.D. Vance characterized as great progress across multiple fronts, though the vice president's optimistic assessment stands in sharp contrast to Tehran's more guarded public statements, revealing a familiar pattern in U.S.-Iranian negotiations, where each side seeks to shape the domestic and international narrative to its advantage, with the Americans emphasizing breakthroughs to project strength and the Iranians downplaying concessions to placate hardline factions within their own clerical establishment, who remain deeply suspicious of any engagement with the Great Satan. At the heart of the emerging framework lies the contentious issue of nuclear verification, with Vice President Vance asserting that Iran has agreed to readmit International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors into its nuclear facilities, a development that, if confirmed and implemented, would mark a significant reversal from Tehran's previous posture of restricting international oversight and expanding uranium enrichment activities beyond the limits prescribed by the defunct Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the 2015 agreement, from which the United States unilaterally withdrew in 2018. However, Iranian officials have swiftly cast doubt upon this claim, with the Foreign Ministry spokesman insisting that no inspection visits are currently planned and emphasizing that any such arrangements remain subject to ongoing technical discussions, a diplomatic hedge that allows Tehran to preserve maneuvering room while extracting maximum concessions from Washington before committing to concrete steps. This contradictory messaging has compelled the administration to articulate a rigid trust but verify doctrine, a phrase resurrected from Cold War arms control rhetoric that places the burden of proof squarely upon Iranian behavior rather than Iranian pronouncements, with Vice President Vance elaborating that you can't trust anybody's words, you have to trust what they actually do, a philosophical position that reflects the administration's deep-seated skepticism toward diplomatic assurances forged through bitter experience with previous Iranian negotiating tactics that employed delay, deception, and asymmetric compliance to advance strategic objectives while avoiding full accountability. The practical implications of this verification-centric approach are profound, as the administration is demanding not merely the presence of inspectors, but unrestricted access to all suspect sites, including military installations, where clandestine enrichment activities have historically been concealed, the authority to conduct short-notice inspections without prior warning, comprehensive sampling of environmental traces to detect undeclared nuclear materials, an unfettered review of centrifuge operations, uranium stockpiles, and research and development activities that could accelerate Iran's breakout capability toward weapons-grade fissile material. Parallel to the nuclear dimension, the economic architecture of the interim framework has emerged as a flashpoint of intense contention, with the Treasury Department authorizing a temporary waiver on Iranian oil sales through August, effectively permitting Tehran to export crude oil to international markets and generate much-needed foreign currency after years of crippling sanctions that have decimated its energy revenues, and precipitated a severe economic contraction characterized by hyperinflation, currency devaluation, widespread unemployment, and acute shortages of essential goods. Yet this financial reprieve comes with stringent and highly prescriptive conditions, as the administration insists that any profits from oil sales must be channeled exclusively toward humanitarian purposes, specifically the purchase of American agricultural staples, including corn, soybeans, and wheat, to alleviate the dire food insecurity afflicting the Iranian populace, a stipulation that serves dual strategic objectives by simultaneously addressing the humanitarian crisis while funneling revenue back into the U.S. agricultural sector, thereby mobilizing domestic political support from farm state legislators and commodity producers who have historically backed the administration's trade policies. President Trump himself emphasized this linkage during his remarks, noting that Iran's people are currently very hungry and that the regime is buying it exclusively from us, framing the arrangement as a humanitarian imperative that also serves American commercial interests. Yet this framing has been met with immediate and categorical rejection from Tehran, with the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman asserting that any unfrozen assets will be deployed with absolute liberty, according to the regime's sovereign priorities, explicitly dismissing the notion of purchasing American agricultural products and signaling, instead, that funds will be directed toward domestic industrial recovery, military modernization, and support for regional proxy allies in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Gaza. This fundamental divergence in interpretation exposes the fragility of the entire negotiating framework, as the United States seeks to impose financial firewalls that prevent resource leakage to Iran's military-industrial complex, while Iran views any limitation on its sovereign spending as an unacceptable infringement upon its national dignity and economic independence, a tension that will likely dominate the forthcoming technical negotiations and could prove insurmountable if neither side is willing to compromise. Meanwhile, the broader Middle Eastern security environment continues to simmer with volatility, complicating the already fraught U.S.-Iranian dialogue and introducing additional variables that could either incentivize a deal or precipitate a collapse. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a longstanding and vocal opponent of any nuclear accommodation with Tehran, has reaffirmed that Israeli forces will maintain an unwavering security posture in southern Lebanon, with the IDF committed to conducting continuous operations to neutralize threats against Israeli citizens and soldiers, demolish terrorist infrastructure operated by Hezbollah and allied militant groups, and preserve a buffer zone along the border that prevents the kind of cross-border raids and rocket attacks that have characterized past conflicts. President Trump has indicated that he is actively reviewing the situation in Lebanon and maintaining open channels of communication with Netanyahu, hinting at potential direct diplomatic intervention to manage Israeli concerns, while simultaneously advancing the broader U.S.-Iranian framework, a delicate balancing act that requires Washington to reassure its closest regional ally without derailing the negotiations through excessive pressure or premature concessions to Israeli security demands. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is simultaneously embarking on a crucial diplomatic tour designed to consolidate Gulf Arab support for the administration's approach, with scheduled meetings over the coming days with leaders from the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Bahrain, culminating in a comprehensive engagement with the Gulf Cooperation Council, which encompasses Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other regional powers whose cooperation is essential for monitoring Iranian compliance, enforcing sanctions in the event of a breakdown, and contributing to a collective regional security architecture that can contain Iranian influence without direct American military intervention. The Gulf states view the negotiations with deep ambivalence, welcoming any reduction in regional tensions that could stabilize oil markets and reduce the threat of Iranian-backed attacks on their shipping lanes and energy infrastructure, yet simultaneously fearing that a weak or poorly enforced agreement could embolden Tehran to expand its regional ambitions, fund additional proxy networks, and challenge their own strategic interests in Yemen and the broader Persian Gulf. On the military preparedness front, the Pentagon has submitted a substantial funding request of approximately $80 billion to cover the costs of ongoing operations in the region, replenish depleted American munitions, and precision-guided weaponry that have been exhausted through support for Israeli strikes and defensive operations, and accelerate the modernization of critical military platforms, including naval assets stationed in the Gulf, air defense systems deployed across U.S. bases in the region, and intelligence surveillance reconnaissance capabilities, essential for monitoring Iranian military movements. President Trump is scheduled to convene with leading defense contractors this week, including representatives from Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics, to urge expedited production schedules and supply chain acceleration, underscoring that while diplomacy remains the preferred pathway, the administration is simultaneously reinforcing its deterrent capacity and preparing for potential escalation should negotiations founder. This dual emphasis on negotiation and military readiness reflects a coherent strategic logic, as credible military threats provide essential leverage that compels Iranian concessions, while diplomatic engagement offers a face-saving off-ramp that allows Tehran to de-escalate without appearing to capitulate to American pressure. National Security Policy analyst Andrew Harding of the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank that has historically advocated for maximum pressure on Iran, offered a cautiously optimistic, yet rigorously vigilant assessment of the emerging framework, acknowledging the Swiss talks as an encouraging initial step that demonstrates Tehran's recognition of the costs of continued confrontation, but emphasizing that Iran's historical pattern of deceptive compliance and strategic patience demands unwavering oversight and an unyielding commitment to verification. Harding noted that the waivers granted on Iranian oil sales are inherently revocable, and any indication of Iranian noncompliance, whether through concealed nuclear activities, diversion of funds to military programs, or intensified proxy attacks against American or allied interests, would prompt an immediate and aggressive response, including the reimposition of sanctions, potential naval interdiction of Iranian oil shipments, and the credible threat of military strikes against nuclear facilities and command and control infrastructure. The president has already demonstrated, through previous airstrikes against Iranian-linked targets in Syria and Iraq, as well as the high-profile killing of Quds Force commander Qasem Soleimani in 2020, that he possesses both the willingness and the capability to employ decisive military force when diplomatic avenues have been exhausted, a track record that lends weight to his warnings and serves as a constant underlying pressure on Iranian decision-makers, who must calculate whether their defiance is worth the risk of American retaliation. Looking toward the immediate future, the coming weeks will be defined by intensive technical negotiations over the specific modalities of IAEA oversight, including the frequency of inspections, the protocols for access to sensitive sites, the procedures for environmental sampling and data verification, and the mechanisms for resolving disputes regarding suspected undeclared nuclear activities, all of which will test the practical limits of Iranian cooperation and the administration's capacity to secure enforceable commitments. Concurrently, financial negotiators must grapple with the mechanisms for tracking Iranian oil revenues, establishing escrow accounts or other financial structures that ensure humanitarian spending, and defining robust auditing and reporting requirements that satisfy American demands for transparency while respecting Iranian sovereignty concerns. The 60-day roadmap is therefore not merely a countdown to a potential deal, but rather a critical probationary period during which Iranian promises must crystallize into irreversible, verifiable actions, and the administration has made abundantly clear that its patience is neither infinite nor unconditional. If Tehran demonstrates genuine compliance, verifiable denuclearization steps, and a measurable reduction in regional aggression, the framework could evolve into a more durable and comprehensive agreement that stabilizes one of the world's most volatile regions, reopens economic opportunities for both nations, and potentially reshapes the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East for a generation. However, if Iran employs the negotiation window merely to buy time, advance its nuclear program through clandestine means, or exploit financial concessions to bolster its military capacities and proxy networks, the United States stands ready to pivot decisively toward a strategy of maximum pressure, military deterrence, and international isolation, a path that carries grave risks of armed confrontation, regional warfare, and cascading economic disruptions that would reverberate across global energy markets and international security. The ultimate outcome remains deeply uncertain, hinging on strategic calculations in both Washington and Tehran, domestic political pressures confronting each leadership, and the unpredictable intersection of regional dynamics. But one conclusion emerges with unmistakable clarity. The next 60 days will constitute a defining chapter in U.S.-Iranian relations, with implications that extend far beyond the nuclear question to encompass the broader future of American engagement with the Middle East and the global nonproliferation regime